The diplomatic chamber aboard Solstice Accord for smelled faintly of citrus, steel, and paranoia. It was shaped like an amphitheater, circular and elegant, the sort of place designed to trick enemies into believing civility was inevitable. Holograms flickered across the ceiling, mimicking a Pleasantarian sky, complete with drifting clouds and occasional birdsong, though none of the gathered delegates had ever seen a bird up close. They called it the Garden Room, as if names had any power over violence. Ambassador Laura Vance sat near the center, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap. Her suit was gray, her hair tucked behind one ear in neat, professional waves. She wore a ceramic pin on her collar, a tiny dove with wings outstretched. It was the official Terran symbol for peace. It was also, in more cynical circles, a warning. She sipped her tea, chamomile organic, steeped precisely 6 minutes. The silence stretched comfortably for a moment before Grothamar of the Skull Empire cracked it open with a low chuckle, the kind that had preceded executions on lesser planets. "Human," Grother said, his voice thick with satisfaction, "you brought tea to a war summit." Laura looked up slowly, offering him a smile just half a what too bright. "I brought tea to a conversation, Executor Mar. If war breaks out mid-sentence, I suppose I'll have to reheat it." Several delegates chuckled, some nervously, others with curiosity. The Glexerai linguist emitted a series of wet clicking noises that translated roughly to, "Is that humor or a cultural threat display?" Grother tilted his head, claws drumming idly on the edge of his table. "You mistake this for conversation. This is a reckoning, child." "I'm older than I look," Laura said lightly. She placed her teacup down with precision. "And reckoning is such a harsh word. We prefer structured conflict resolution." The delegates from the Alari Confederacy murmured to one another in scent-based language, releasing a mix of vinegar and petrichor that meant either she's naive or she's suicidal. Grother leaned forward. His scales caught the artificial sunlight, each plate gleaming like polished obsidian. "Your species blunders into the stars with nothing but smiles and metaphors, then wonders why you're treated like children." "Better smiles than warships," Laura replied, then paused. "Though we have those, too. We just don't feel the need to decorate every parking orbit with them." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. The minor delegates watched her now with something close to respect, or at least caution. It was always the Terran way, too many smiles, too few tells. They spoke as if every sentence had a second draft. Grother's tail coiled, ever so slightly. "The Galactic Empire recognizes the sovereignty of all developing civilizations, so long as they remain in their place." "I see," Laura nodded. "And this summit? An invitation to remain in our place." "A reminder," Grother said smoothly. "One way or another." She took a slow breath, then glanced at the child-sized alien sitting beside the Cellari representatives. A fuzz-covered observer named Tilk. No diplomatic power, just a student intern. No doubt sent to learn by watching civilizations crumble. Tilk raised a soft hand. "Ambassador Laura, why do you walk like your feet remember something painful?" The question struck the air like a dropped glass. Laura blinked once. The smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes tightened, the way a bowstring might. "Because they do," she said. "But that's a story for when you're older." Grother made a growling sound of amusement, then stood, tall and towering, easily 9 feet of muscle and menace. "We grow tired of Earth's wordplay. Perhaps a physical reminder will suffice." 2 of his guards moved. They weren't supposed to carry weapons in the garden room. Yet from beneath their ceremonial cloaks, they drew sleek kinetic pistols. Empire issue, matte black, illegal here. Every delegate froze, except Laura, who continued to sip her tea. Grother raised a claw. "Shoot her in the face." The command fell like a stone into still water. One guard took aim. The barrel gleamed. The shot fired, sharp, fast, inevitable. The bullet screamed through the air. Laura blinked. That was all. The sound of the shot echoed, bounced off the ceilings, curved down through silence, and the bullet struck nothing. It hung for a second, mid-air, as if confused. Then it dropped with a clatter at Laura's feet, perfectly intact. Steam hissed gently from her teacup. Several delegates stood in shock. Grother's smug expression cracked slightly, eyes narrowing. "What?" Laura set her cup down, her fingers feather-light on porcelain. "My apologies," she said. Her voice hadn't risen, hadn't changed. But now it vibrated with something more fundamental than tone. "You must have mistaken me," she continued, standing smoothly, "for someone harmless." The Glexerai backed up 2 steps without realizing it. The Ulari delegates suddenly began sweating through their scent glands, an unusual sign of primal fear. Laura moved to the center of the chamber. Her posture was still diplomatic, still soft, but each step carried the precision of someone who could kill before your next thought finished forming. "I'd like to address a procedural matter," she said, tone even cordial. "It appears the Empire has violated the summit's core protocols, including the very first clause: no weapons, no threats, no violence within these walls." She raised one hand. The lights dimmed. A projection bloomed in midair, showing a recording of the guards drawing their weapons. Grother's voice echoed from the feed. "Shoot her in the face." "Since a declaration of aggression has occurred," Laura said calmly, "I now invoke Article 9 of the Terran Emergency Response Doctrine." Grother growled. "There is no such article." "There is now." She smiled at him like one might at a dog barking behind a fence. "We're very fast learners." A deep bass tone rang through the chamber as the doors sealed with a hiss. Red lights flashed once, then went dead. Emergency override protocols deactivated. Delegates reached for comm devices. Nothing responded. The air changed, static, dry, a silence that screamed. "You are now all considered participants in an active threat scenario," Laura said. "Please remain seated. We'll be conducting assessments shortly." "You dare," Grother started. "Sho," Laura held up a finger, still smiling. "You had your turn." The guards tried to move again. One reached for a second pistol. Laura stepped forward, almost casually, and flicked her fingers in a short, deliberate gesture. A ceiling panel opened, and a thick metal cable dropped, wrapping the guard mid-torso and hoisting him screaming into the air. He hit the ceiling, bounced once, and stopped moving. The second guard looked at her. He didn't reach for anything. Smart, she thought. "Executor Mar," Laura said, turning back, "you have just declared war on Earth. On behalf of your empire. Without legal cause, without procedural warning, and without the faintest understanding of who you're actually dealing with." He tried to speak, jaw tightening, but the words tangled somewhere in his throat. "You called me child," Laura said softly. "You're not the first. That's the funny thing about your kind. You mistake softness for weakness, politeness for passivity. You forget that wolves don't snarl until they're certain the kill is theirs." She stepped closer to Grother, her voice now low enough that only he could hear. "My mentor taught me a phrase. An old one. Do not tap the glass, lest the monster remembers it is not in a cage." "Who trained you?" he asked. It wasn't bravado anymore. It was fear unadorned. Laura smiled again. "The woman your empire labeled a ghost story. Earth called her Baba Yaga." The color drained from his features. "I'm not her," Laura said. "But I was her student, and I remember every lesson." She turned, addressing the rest of the room. "This summit will continue. You will listen. You will comply. And if anyone else would like to try their luck, I suggest you do it soon, before I finish my tea." She sat down again. Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. The cable above retracted, bloodless. Tilk, the fuzzy intern, raised a tentative paw. "Yes?" Laura asked, tone still warm. "Are you going to kill all of us?" Tilk asked in a whisper. Laura looked around the chamber, met every eye in turn. "Only if you make me repeat myself." The room fell silent. And for the first time in living memory, the Empire realized they'd kicked a sleeping beast in the teeth. Earth had sent a diplomat, but they'd trained her to be a weapon, and the chamber was locked. No one moved. Not the Cellari dignitary, with 3 eyes flicking in separate directions. Not the Olari envoy, still emitting the sour scent of fear. Not even Grothermar, whose claws now hovered midair, poised between ego and annihilation. Laura Vance sat with impeccable posture in her chair, her gray suit unwrinkled despite the earlier attempt on her life. She poured a fresh cup of chamomile tea, steam rising gently from the rim. The silence around her was cavernous, a stillness bordering on reverence. Or horror. "You may breathe," she said lightly, placing the teapot back on its tray. "There are no bullets in the air. For now." Grothermar inhaled audibly, then clenched his jaw. The last time he'd looked this shaken, it had been in a war zone on Ixar Prime, watching a bomb diffuse in his own hand. "You orchestrated this," he growled, throat trembling. Laura didn't look up from her cup. "I arranged contingencies. You executed an assassination. Let's not confuse cause with consequence." The Glexerai linguist, a thin insectoid with chitinous whiskers, emitted a string of sounds that translated to, "Her tone remains cordial, but her grammar now lacks passive structure. She's entering a combative dialect. She's smiling while making threats," muttered the Ulari ambassador, wringing 2 of his 6 hands. Laura lifted her gaze slowly and turned it toward the center of the room, where the blood from the lifted guard had evaporated into a sterilized puddle. This was never a summit for peace. Not after Earth discovered the Empire's hidden fleet staging around Kepler. 88D. We just needed a stage. Somewhere civilized. With good lighting. Grother stood again, but slower this time. Less for intimidation, more for equilibrium. "You're claiming moral high ground," he said, voice low. "But you're the one holding us hostage." "I'm not holding you," she replied. "I've simply turned off the exit." The doors were still sealed, rimmed in faint red. The AI had gone dormant, at least visibly. Laura had done something to the system. No one could trace it. She hadn't typed a command or tapped a neural uplink. But the station now answered to her, and her alone. "I'd like to ask some questions," Laura said. "Feel free to answer honestly. Or creatively. I'll know either way." The Glexerai flinched. "You're interrogating delegates in a peace summit?" "No," she said. "I'm analyzing potential threats to Earth in a controlled environment, which happens to resemble a summit." She gestured toward a Cellari Diplomat. "Your ships were seen near SETI 12, launching what looked like mapping probes. Were you coordinating with the Skal fleet?" The Cellari opened their mouth to protest, but Laura raised a finger. "I recommend truth," she said. "Not for diplomacy's sake, but for your own dignity." Their reply was slow. "We offered logistical support." "And you, Ulari," she said, turning to the ambassador, whose robes were soaked in scent sweat. "Your people intercepted human transports last month. You claimed it was a navigational error." "That was miscommunication," the ambassador stammered. "You disabled transponders and reprogrammed the ship's course to collide with the sun." There was a beat of silence. "Tragic miscommunication," the Ulari corrected. "Of course," Laura said, her tone polite. "I've reviewed your logs. The only tragedy is how badly you underestimated our patience." The Glexerai spoke again. This is extortion. Psychological warfare." Laura tilted her head, amused. "Everything Earth has ever learned about diplomacy, we learned from watching you. We watched, we adapted, we evolved. And then we added poetry." She reached into her coat pocket and removed a small square device. It looked like a Terran music player, wood-paneled, charming, harmless. She tapped it. The room dimmed again. This time, the projection above wasn't a recording. It was a map, a real-time display of military assets across multiple sectors. Glowing red ships clustered near Earth's outer colonies. Coordinates and fleet trajectories, all live. "That's not possible," Grother muttered. "That information is restricted to Imperial Command." Laura didn't look at him. "You've been broadcasting on frequencies older than your own calendar system. Your encryption is ceremonial, like the claws you wave around in public." She tapped the screen again. It zoomed into one vessel, an Empire flagship. It began blinking, then exploded. Somewhere, in deep space, a line of code had activated. Laura watched the ripple move through the map. 3 more ships blinked out. The room stared, half minds frozen. "You're killing them," someone whispered. "No," Laura replied. "I'm removing obstacles." and demonstrating an important lesson. Grother lunged forward then, roaring, too fast for most eyes. A blur of motion, but not too fast for her. Laura rose with uncanny stillness, sidestepped him, and placed one hand lightly on his wrist. Just a single point of contact. Then she twisted. Not violently, not visibly, just enough. Grother's arm bent backward with a crunch. He dropped to one knee, breath punched from his chest. His guard started forward, and froze when a tiny dart embedded itself in the floor between them, hissing softly. The Cellari whispered, when did she? You're not dealing with a soldier, Laura said, kneeling beside Grother. You're dealing with someone trained to dismantle minds, not just bodies. The difference is efficiency. He glared up at her, sweat trickling down the base of his scaled neck. She trained you to be a monster. She trained me to listen, and to wait. She straightened, to smile before I strike. She walked back to the center, the delegates parting instinctively. Earth is not here to beg for inclusion, she said. We're here because you brought war to our borders, targeted our civilians, our children, and smiled while lying through your fangs. The chamber was so quiet now, even the hum of the station had receded. You saw humans as soft, she continued, because we make music, because we ask questions, because we build homes before fortresses. But we also remember every species that looked at us like prey, and we learned something from each of them. She turned to face the entire chamber. From the skull, we learned to strike first when survival is at stake. From the Alari, we learned that diplomacy is just war written in cursive. And from the Glexerai, she smiled, we learned how to weaponize politeness. There was movement in the back. Tilk, the student observer, slowly raised his small hand. Yes, Laura asked, voice returning to something almost gentle. Did you really train with Baba Yaga? Tilk asked. Laura's smile softened, almost fond. I did. What was it like? She exhaled. The air felt heavier now, quieter. She made me walk in snow barefoot for 20 miles. Told me every warm place was earned. She gave me a knife and told me to kill the man who broke into her hut. I did. She never asked how, just nodded. The room listened, breathless. She read poetry to me while I stitched wounds, gave me a riddle every morning and a bruise every night. She looked down at her hands, flexed her fingers once. She told me, the galaxy is a cold place, so be colder or burn brighter. Never in between. Tilk tilted his head. Was she kind? No, Laura said. But she was good. Grother groaned, still kneeling, one arm limp. This isn't war. It's manipulation. It's survival, Laura replied. You attacked us first. You've been attacking us for years, behind your treaties and preambles. We just chose today to answer. She pressed a final button on the panel. The map disappeared. The lights returned to full. The choice now is simple, she said. Sign the revised treaty Earth sent last month, already ratified by 27 neutral systems, or remain in this room with me until someone starts screaming. The chamber didn't erupt in protest. It didn't collapse into shouts. It was worse than that. It was quiet compliance. The Cellari ambassador nodded slowly. The Ulari wiped scent glands and whispered in agreement. Even the Glexerai, usually so proud of their logic, bowed their heads slightly. Grother stared at her from the floor, eyes burning. This isn't peace. No, she agreed. But it's the next best thing. She returned to her chair, lifting her cup of tea, still warm. Across the chamber, silent hands reached for styluses and digital parchment. The treaty would be signed before the hour ended. And Laura Vance, trained by a ghost, sculpted by snow and steel, sipped her tea in silence, already calculating the next dozen moves. Outside the sealed walls, Earth waited, and not a single soul dared knock. The stars outside solstice accord for pulsed in silence, indifferent to the tension curled like wire inside the diplomatic chamber. Every delegate now sat still, postures stiff with the unnatural calm of animals that had finally realized they were prey. There were no more insults, no more patronizing smiles. Even Grother, now stripped of bluster and half broken on the floor, kept his eyes averted. Laura Vance, the smiling human diplomat who drank tea while dismantling empires, adjusted her sleeve and set her empty cup down with the quiet grace of ritual. Her gaze swept the room, not assessing for threats. There were none, not anymore. But for hesitation. Hesitation was useful. Hesitation meant fear. And fear meant leverage. A soft chime broke the silence. Not from the room. From orbit. Grother's remaining guard stiffened. He wasn't foolish enough to reach for a weapon again, but his breathing shifted. Everyone with access to a neural link turned slightly, distracted. Laura blinked slowly. "Reinforcements?" she asked gently, her voice lilting as though asking about a missing ingredient in a soup. The Glexerai responded first. 3 ships just dropped from hyperspace outside the Accord's perimeter. All Skull. "Only 3?" Laura asked, almost disappointed. "Flagship class. Armed. No communication. Their weapons are hot." Several delegates began to rise. Laura didn't. She just exhaled through her nose, calm as always. "Executor Mar," she said without turning her head. "Did you call for backup before or after ordering my execution?" Grother lifted his chin with as much pride as he could still muster. "I informed them you had breached diplomatic conduct." She gave him a pitying glance. "You shot me in the face, Grother. I simply made it inefficient." A ripple of panic crept back into the room. The ship's arrival changed everything. Earth's ambassador might have seized control of the situation, but Earth had yet to show military presence in the region. Until now, it had all been one woman and her unervingly precise control of the room. But warships? That was different. A holographic map flickered into life in the center of the chamber. The 3 Skull ships were marked clearly, red and triangular, circling the station like wolves. A moment later, the map pinged again. Another ship dropped out of hyperspace. Then 2 more. And another. They weren't Skull. The new arrivals bore no official insignia, no empire, no alliance. Yet their movements were mathematically perfect, surrounding the Skull ships without locking weapons, maintaining exactly 1.1 kilometers of distance. Every delegate turned slowly to look at Laura. She lifted her wrist and tapped a button barely visible on her cufflink. The holographic map shifted. Now the neutral ships were tagged. Earth Strategic Response Group. Black Flight. Unit 7 to 12. Mission: observe only. Observe. Not engage. Not defend. Just watch. "They've been here this whole time," the Glexerai whispered. Laura gave the barest shrug. "It's bad manners to show up before you're invited." Grother stared at the hologram, disbelief radiating off him in waves. "You surrounded us, without firing a single weapon." "Oh, we fired plenty," Laura said, rising from her chair. "Just not the kind you're used to noticing." The Glexerai looked up sharply. "You've been broadcasting counter signals, disabling our comms, blinding our sensors." "Correct." She walked slowly around the table now, hands behind her back. "Our listening systems have been capturing your fleet chatter for weeks. We didn't even need to break your encryption, just waited for someone to send a birthday message with full fleet coordinates embedded in the metadata." The Cellari Diplomat dropped their pen. "You're bluffing," Grother snarled. "Those ships are empty. You're using scare tactics." "I'm using silence." Laura stopped beside him. "Do you know how hard it is to keep a warship completely quiet? Not a single ping, no heat trace, no emissions. They had to train for years. Learn how to drift. Learn how to breathe less." Grother's scales rippled involuntarily. "You called for a rescue," Laura said softly. "What you summoned, instead, was a very polite set of watchers. And if you or your ships make the wrong move, they'll politely erase you." The Glexerai tried again. "This is a violation of the summit's neutrality agreement." "You voided that when you fired the first shot," Laura replied. "Earth simply adapted the environment." Another alert flashed on the map. One of the Skull ships, clearly unnerved, had locked a target on the Accord station. It was a bluff. No sane commander would fire on a summit vessel. But sanity wasn't a reliable metric anymore. "Executor," Laura said without looking. If you don't instruct them to stand down in the next 10 seconds, I will. Grother gritted his teeth. 10. They won't obey you, he spat. 9. They only recognize. 8. He swore, then switched frequencies through his neural link. Laura listened, eyes distant, catching fragments of Skal war code and flustered responses. By 3, the ships had powered down weapons. By 1, they were retreating. The map updated accordingly. No one cheered. No one clapped. Because now they understood what they were dealing with. Earth hadn't brought a diplomat. They had sent a magician, a tactician in a cardigan, a predator with good manners. You see, Laura said, turning back to the stunned assembly, we don't enjoy war. It's messy, loud, expensive, and it rarely ends where it should. So we prefer preparation, subtlety, execution with minimal violence. She tapped the hologram again, and a series of files blinked into existence. Audio logs, intercepted transmissions, even holovids of Empire ships boarding Terran freighters disguised as pirates. You tried to provoke us, she said, to push us into a mistake. You expected us to retaliate with blunt force. You hoped we'd trip. Instead, we documented. We gathered. We prepared a dossier thick enough to suffocate your legal counsel. The Olari delegate finally spoke again. This could trigger a galactic tribunal. Laura smiled at him. Why do you think I invited them? A new alert appeared. Ships. Dozens. Not warships. Transport vessels. Diplomat shuttles. Mediators. From neutral systems. From independent observers. From former vassal states tired of Empire oversight. Earth had sent out one quiet call days before the summit, coded beneath agricultural trade requests. The response had been overwhelming. Now they were all arriving, eager to witness what happened next. You knew this would happen, Grother whispered, voice hoarse. You planned it all. No, Laura said. We predicted it. She stepped toward the center once more. Earth's history is full of empires collapsing under their own arrogance. We didn't want to add another name to the list. But we were prepared if you insisted. Grother sagged. You don't want peace. I do, she said, with a sincerity that twisted the room's stomach. I want peace so badly that I trained for 30 years under the cruelest instructor my planet ever birthed. I want peace so badly I learned how to dismantle threats with words, with glances, with shadows. Then what do you want now? Asked the Selari, her voice barely above a whisper. Laura tilted her head. I want you to remember, she said. Every time you see a Terran vessel, every time you smile at one of our children, every time you hear a human say please, that we let you walk out of this room. The station lights flickered once, then steadied. The red seals disengaged. Doors hissed open. Freedom beckoned. But no one moved. Because now they understood that freedom, like peace, was a gift Earth could rescind. Tilk, the student alien, broke the silence. Are you finished? Laura considered the question, then walked over and knelt in front of the small creature. No, she said. This was only the prologue. Tilk's large eyes blinked. To what? To the moment the galaxy stops seeing humans as newcomers, she whispered, and starts seeing us as the standard. She stood, looked over her shoulder, and said to no one in particular, there is no peace treaty now. Only an agreement to survive each other. Make sure your people remember who signed it last. The lights dimmed again, not from power loss, but from something more ancient. Respect. Or fear. It no longer mattered which. Laura Vance walked calmly from the chamber, the diplomats too stunned to follow. Outside, Earth's ships didn't fire. They didn't need to. They just drifted there, silent, watching, waiting. The diplomatic chamber was empty now, its silence broken only by the hum of cooling systems and the faint echo of what had transpired. The walls no longer bore the residue of arrogance. The delegates were gone, escorted off-world, flanked by Earth's observers, eyes wide with the dawning realization that peace had not been achieved so much as offered conditionally. Laura Vance stood alone in the center, fingers laced behind her back, eyes closed, her breath calm and precise. She didn't need applause. She had results. A faint hiss from the corridor signaled the arrival of the station's automated cleaning drones. She ignored them, instead gazing at the place where the table had been, where alliances once sat, shoulders squared in superiority. Now they knew. They hadn't faced a diplomat. They had faced the storm wrapped in a velvet glove. Footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't turn. "I wonder how long you take," she said softly. A male voice answered, casual, warm. "You know we enjoy making an entrance." She smiled without opening her eyes. Director Sato. He stepped beside her, tall, middle-aged, his black coat lacking any insignia, but unmistakably military. The kind of man who had never fired a weapon but could order 1,000 to be fired in sequence, with poetry in the cadence. "Black flight reported in," he said. "No need to engage. Just like you predicted." "They always blink before impact," Laura said. He watched her for a long moment. "And the treaty?" "They'll sign," she replied. "Not because they want peace. Because they want to live." Sato nodded, then glanced around. "You left them a way out." "I gave them the illusion of one," she said. "The true exit is submission. The signature is just a ritual." There was no pride in her voice, just calculation. Sato tilted his head, studying her as he might a rare chemical. "And what happens next?" "I return to Earth," she said. "Give my report. Pretend to be tired. Let the next summit invite go to someone with a softer voice and an even gentler lie." Sato chuckled. "They're going to remember this day for centuries." She looked at him. "They're not supposed to remember me. They're supposed to remember us. What we did without raising a single flag." He studied her for a moment, then said, "I saw the footage. The way you stood still. The bullet. That was not standard." Laura's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There's nothing standard about what she taught me." Sato lowered his voice. "She would be proud. She would call me slow." Laura stepped forward, her tone quiet. "She used to say that true victory isn't killing your enemy. It's making them redefine what survival looks like." Sato's voice dropped. "You think they'll retaliate?" "No," she said. "Not soon. Not directly. They'll shift blame. Whisper. Pretend it was a miscalculation. But their eyes will change. The way prey shifts when it realizes the forest has new rules." Sato adjusted his cuffs. "You made a lot of enemies today." "I made them aware," she replied. "Which is more valuable." A soft tone rang in her ear. Private comm, she tapped it. "Ambassador Vance," said a neutral voice. "Secure message from Terran High Command. Directive revision pending." "Send it," she said. A stream of data flooded her retinal feed. Coordinates. Names. Intel assessments. Classified movements. Sato raised an eyebrow. "You're being redirected?" Laura blinked once. "They want me to stay." He frowned. "To do what?" She turned toward him fully, for the first time. Her expression was calm, but her voice held something sharp underneath. A shift in gravity. "Finish the job." Sato's posture straightened. "I thought the mission was containment." "It was," she said. "Now it's consolidation." She turned and began to walk toward the far end of the chamber where the real controls lay, hidden beneath what once passed for ceremonial art. With a gesture, the panel slid away, revealing a recessed terminal. Her fingers moved across it without hesitation. "You're activating the back door," Sato said quietly. "They gave me a key for a reason," she replied. "The Empire's central relay network runs through this quadrant. I'm going to give them a gift." Sato's expression darkened. "What kind of gift?" She looked over her shoulder, eyes unreadable. "A mirror." With another input, the interface pulsed. A silent command pinged from a station, outward, like ripples in a lake. Across 5 systems, Empire transmission hubs shuddered, and then opened. Messages once kept encrypted. Surveillance files. Troop movements. Resource allocations. All of it, dumped into the galactic net, visible to enemies, allies, and bystanders alike. Sato exhaled slowly. "You're turning them inside out." "No," she said. "I'm making them transparent. For once." A pause. Then he asked, "Why now?" She stared at the screen. "Because I've seen what happens when monsters wear masks long enough. People stopped calling them monsters. She stepped back as the data began pouring out like blood from a slit throat. The galaxy will blame you, Sato said. They'll blame Earth, she corrected. And then they'll fear Earth. And then they'll think twice before sending a battleship to orbit a Terran nursery. Sato didn't argue, because that was the real mission. Not defense, not diplomacy, but deterrence. And fear was the strongest currency in the void. Laura stepped away from the terminal and pulled a small object from her pocket. It looked like a simple pendant, silver, etched with old Terran writing. She pressed her thumb against it. A single hologram bloomed. It showed a weathered woman with white hair and a face like winter, unblinking, unsmiling. Her eyes, even in holographic blue, felt like knives. Baba Yaga. Not her real name, of course. That had been buried with the men who dared speak it. The message was short. You will be underestimated. That is your advantage. Make them forget their claws. Make them remember their throats. Then static. Laura closed the pendant and tucked it away. She warned me, she said aloud, that diplomacy would be the hardest battlefield. Because here, your weapon must always be your smile. Sato watched her carefully. And is it? She turned, brushing dust from her sleeve. Only if you've never learned to kill with it. A new alert chimed from the station's mainframe. Not an attack. A response. The Cellari had sent the signed treaty. So had the Glexeri. Even Grother, whose arm was now in a sling and ego barely held together, had submitted a formal statement of compliance, couched in conditional language, but signed nonetheless. Sato crossed his arms. What happens when the galaxy realizes you never meant to negotiate in the first place? Laura raised an eyebrow. Who said I didn't? Sato grunted. We baited them. No, she corrected. We revealed them. Their hand was always moving toward the knife. I just gave them a mirror. He nodded toward the exit. And now, she said, we give them silence. Silence. Let them fill it, she said. With doubt. With speculation. Let them fear the next human envoy might be worse. Let them wonder how many of us there are. Sato's voice lowered. How many are there? She smiled again, that faint, harmless thing. Enough. As she turned to leave, the lights in the chamber dimmed one last time. It was not power loss. It was closure. The mask had fallen. And what stood behind it wasn't a human dressed for peace. It was the patient weapon of a species that had survived its own extinction 12 times over. Sato watched her go, then tapped his comm. Mission complete, he said. Begin phase 3. A pause. Then from the command deck far above, a voice crackled back. Do they know what phase 3 is? Sato stared after Laura. No, he said. But she does. The doors slid closed behind her. And in the dark, the galaxy began to whisper Earth's name. Not as a question, but as a warning.